Bitcoin Club presents.
Hello, man. Very grateful that we're doing this. Just to show you our little crowd right now here. Here it is. You can say hi to the guys and to the Bitcoin Club. Yeah. And we are recording this, so we'll publish it so our whole community will see it. But again, thank you very much for what you're going to teach us.
No worries, man. Is the video quality okay? Like I feel like I'm looking at myself, but I look like fuzzy and blurry for some reason.
I think that's Google, but it's okay for this purpose.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, Ivan, you want me to pull up my... So I'm going to present a few slides, and then Tony's going to kind of take over. You want me to pull that up and
Sure thing.
share with you?
Yep. Let's do this.
And then you want to save some time for Q&A at the end. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect. So we'll try to take maybe 20 minutes total here, and then jump into any questions that people have.
Sure. Great.
All right. You ready?
Yep.
Terrific. Well, hey, first of all, thank you. Good to see the faces in the crowd, and thank you so much, Ivan, for having us. This is a topic that we can't possibly discuss often enough, and we're very excited to be here. Just to make sure, are you guys seeing my screen, the importance of 100% self-custody?
Yep. Yes.
Good. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to just give a little bit of a background. I think it's useful to, have sort of context, like what is it like someone going on this journey to self-custody, and then Tony's going to hit on like the important questions people should be asking about self-custody and some of the practical takeaways that you'll hopefully have as to how you think about doing this the right way. So my self-custody journey, I think, is just a useful place to start. I found Bitcoin in mid-2022. I'd been sort of exploring the crypto rabbit hole, and fortunately stumbled across some very smart people who were talking exclusively about Bitcoin, and obviously the collapse of Celsius, FTX, a lot of those things really sort of forged my conviction in Bitcoin specifically, as I realized the games being played. But for the longest time, I was keeping my coins on an exchange. And it wasn't an exchange that I would trust today, and it's not one that we would ever recommend it the Bitcoin way. But I hadn't had this sort of notion of self-custody reiterated enough times at that point for it to really materialize. The problems, as I learned, and many of you probably know some of these, hopefully this isn't all new concepts, but if some of you are newer, perhaps it is with exchanges, first of all, they could lose your coins. I mean, there are a number of ways that can happen, through a hack or anything like that. Something I've experienced personally with exchanges is they can restrict withdrawals, so you don't actually have access to your Bitcoin. It's an IOU. It's not your Bitcoin, not your keys, not your coin. They might not actually have all of your coins. Like we saw with FTX, they were selling assets that they didn't actually hold and was part of their blow up. Something we've seen recently, like with Coinbase, the hack that many of you have probably heard about, is you can have a data breach. And so this was also an issue for Mt. Gox. When someone has access to your personal data, they might know exactly how much Bitcoin you've purchased and can target you either physically, which would be incredibly dangerous, or it could be a cybersecurity vulnerability for you. The other thing, and one I didn't appreciate for the longest time, was that keeping my coins on an exchange meant I couldn't run my own, or I could run my own node. I couldn't actually transact through that node, which I think Tony will probably hit on the importance of that. And they can censor you, right? You're completely beholden to their whims or to government, who might interfere with their operations and say this, you can't send this Bitcoin, or kick this person off your platform. People get debanked all the time, all over the world, and exchanges are effectively an extension of that sort of paradigm. So, as I began to figure some of this out, I decided to move into a collaborative custody arrangement, and I thought that was maybe the solution I needed. The problems there were that I was still giving up my KYC information, so they knew who I was. Obviously, they're no less exposed to something like a data breach or a hack as an exchange. And for the particular service provider I was using, I was relying on their proprietary apps, which meant that when they had maintenance or downtime, even if they told me in advance, Bitcoin was no longer this, 24/7, 365 monetary solution that I needed or wanted it to be. The other problem with these sorts of solutions is if you don't know what you're getting into, you might end up in a really bad hardware wallet setup. They offer, in many times, even promote or send you for free very inferior hardware wallet options. And again, not something I understood when I was getting into this. I thought they were all more or less the same. Not the case, and Tony will talk about that. Still didn't get to run a node. Again, we'll get to that. Really, when you're working with a collaborative custody solution, you really don't have privacy because there's someone on the back end who knows how much Bitcoin you have. They know when you send it, when you receive it, and candidly, they need to be able to access that information because it's part of their business model. They're going to support you, and if you have questions or you need help with using their app or what have you, they need access to some of that data. And so you've got individuals, fallible people, who have access to this very important information about your financial life and about your personal life in general. And then same with keeping your coins on an exchange, you've got regulatory capture risk. I think people are a little too hyped up about government adoption of Bitcoin and think that means many of the regulatory risks are over. But as we see that changes with administrations or in desperate times call for desperate measures. You've got things like the 6102 attack where FDR confiscated gold from the American people, and that same risk is a global phenomenon. So not something to get complacent about. So fortunately, I found the Bitcoin way, I guess it was just a year and a half ago, and heard Tony on a podcast, and he was talking about the dangers of some of these other arrangements, and many of which I've listed here. And it became very evident to me that I needed to take 100% self-custody of my Bitcoin. I needed to do it the right way. And there were a lot of skills that I lacked because I was relying on sort of these crutches of other, like the collaborative custody arrangement, where I just didn't know how to do things properly. And I think it's a really important thing moving into a Bitcoinized world that people have the skills to use Bitcoin the right way. And then I joined as Chief Growth Officer a little over a year ago. Have been incredibly fortunate to work with this team. Love the guys. Very few people in the world I trust more than Tony and the others I get to work with. And so today, I'm a financially sovereign individual. And I'll tell you what, for all of the FUD you hear about self-custody and single points of failure, which are completely things that you can overcome if you do it the right way with the proper training, you just feel a sense of peace of mind that I don't think you're going to ever get anywhere else. So that is my 2 cents. I want Tony here to jump into some of the practical applications of self-custody, why it's so important, and if you think, what sort of information you need to have to understand if self-custody is right for you, which, quick disclaimer, I think it's for everyone. So Tony, I'll let you take it away.
Sounds great. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It's a big pleasure to be here with you. We're going to discuss self-custody, the big elephant in the room, the big topic that scares the living daylights out of most people. But in reality, it's nothing to be afraid of. In fact, it is the number one thing to be excited over because we've never had anything like this before, and this is once in a species opportunity to actually be part of something that will go down in history, in my opinion, as the 9th or 10th wonder of the world combined. And I'll explain to you why. Let me just share my screen with you real quick, just to bring up my slides. So, Bitcoin self-custody is the revolution, okay? Owning Bitcoin alone is not enough. If you don't own the private keys, you don't own the Bitcoin. And in fact, you've done absolutely nothing. If you're getting excited about government adoption or institutional adoption of Bitcoin because you think it's going to make you rich in fiat dollars, then I'm afraid you still don't understand Bitcoin and what its purpose is. Bitcoin was not created to play along with fiat currencies or to extend their lifeline. Bitcoin was created to completely replace them with sound money that no one can manipulate or control or corrupt. So governments, as friendly as they may seem in some jurisdictions, I can promise you one thing with 1,000,000% conviction: they do not like Bitcoin. Because Bitcoin strips the power of money from them, and there's not a single politician in this universe that will willingly give that away. So just keep that in mind before getting sucked into some of the influencer hype about people are getting excited about how a government or an institution is buying so much Bitcoin and I'm going to become rich in dollars or euros. That is completely besides the point and is the road to failure. So, what are the questions you should ask yourself about self-custody? Self-custody scares people because they don't come from the tech background and they think that if they make a mistake, they're going to lose their funds, which is a valid skill. But it's an unnecessary fear. It's simply because of the unknown. Since we've never had this before, there's a lot of questions or imaginary thoughts that goes through everybody's head. So let's go through some of the more popular questions. What should you ask yourself about self-custody? Well, question number one, is self-custody right for me? In our opinion, at the Bitcoin way, the answer to this is a resounding yes for 100% of the population. So let me ask yourself this question. Do you want more fiat or freedom money? Fiat is essentially worthless paper that a bunch of people can print whenever they want. It has zero value. So that's the lie that all of us need to unlearn, because that's the one thing we've all been duped into thinking, was the way things are. It's not. The other question is, can you operate a computer and a smartphone? The good thing about self-custody is that you don't need to be a computer genius to do it. You don't need a PhD in cryptography either. You just need to be comfortable with the basics of one. And do you have a low time preference to learn the skills? Bitcoin is not a get-rich scheme. You're not going to put in $100 or euros tonight and wake up with $1 million next week to go buy the Lambo. That's not what this is about. That's not how it works. So let's get that out of the way. The other question is, what trade-offs am I willing to make? So, am I willing to KYC and give up my privacy? So for those that are not familiar with KYC, it stands for Know Your Customer. So traditionally, when you open up accounts with a bank or any institution, they ask you 700 questions. You need to submit your passport, your driver's license, God knows what else, under the guise of for your protection, making sure everything is okay. It's anti-money laundering and all that marketing that they throw at us. The reality is none of this is true. KYC is strictly for one reason only, and that is surveillance and control, to be able to track every single move that every individual makes. But the problem with that is that it creates a centralized honeypot, and once hacked or if it falls in the wrong hands, you have a potential problem on your hand. The other thing is that, do you really trust a third party to look after your keys? Traditionally, we had no choice. We had money, you had to put it in the bank. Unless you had a big safe at home where you could stuff it under a bed somewhere, it just wasn't practical. So this is something that we've been taught, that's just how things work. But as we've seen time and time again, third parties cannot be trusted, because once your money is in that bank, it is no longer your money. It is 100% theirs, and they decide what you do with it. Can you recover a multi-sig wallet in a worst-case scenario? As we know, there's many services out there that claim to be the holy grail of Bitcoin self-custody by having them, a third party, hold one of your backup keys under the guise that if you lose one of yours, you can call them and everything will be fine. That is false, because there's a lot of trade-offs that you give up with that, such as the KYC, censorship, and things of that sort that they do not discuss when they market their products. So, are you okay with the possibility of censorship? Because when things go bad, that's the first thing that takes place. So, in the case of a collaborative custody, for example, if you lose one of your keys and some government forbids the party that you signed up with from signing your transaction, then what happens? Then you're completely out of luck without access to any of your funds. Now, most people don't talk about this because they assume, this is never going to happen where I live. I can promise you, again, with 100% certainty, that when things break, that is the first thing that takes place. So expect it. So, are you willing to compromise on all of these things? If the answer is yes, then do nothing. Like stay wherever you are, do whatever you feel like doing, and potentially risk your privacy and your Bitcoin. But if you're not willing to compromise, and I don't believe anyone should, because your time and energy are the most valuable things out there, then you need to learn the skills to do proper self-custody of your Bitcoin. Again, this is not rocket science or nuclear physics. This is just a series of new steps the world has never seen before. You simply need to learn them, and once you do, there is no going back. So, how do I do this right? Another popular question. Well, we need to take this seriously. Bitcoin self-custody is not an afternoon project or a side hustle or things that you do whenever you feel like it. Now you are the heads of security. You are the bank. This is your wealth that you are protecting. And so if there's one thing you want to be OCD over, it's going to be this. Because if you lose it or make a mistake, it's a one-way street. Everybody knows this. There's no refund center in Bitcoin. So making sure you work with the right tools and hardware is critical. Only function with open source tools and hardware so that you know that the software powering that device cannot be tampered with. There are no secret or hidden backdoors. What the developer is saying the product does, it actually does do it. Exclusively air-gapped hardware devices. These are the signing devices that create your private keys. Those cannot touch a computer ever. If ever it does, we don't touch it or recommend it, no matter what. And if you're not very technical and don't want to spend, a long time, many weeks, possibly months, doing the trial and error and learning it yourself, well, consider proper training from experts. And of course, you need to keep your skills up to date and fine-tuned. Again, this is not hard. It's just new. So, what does all this look like, in practice? Well, at the Bitcoin, for example, we help you prepare and become familiar with encrypted vaults to store sensitive data. We're not talking about your seed phrase, that's always offline. But for everything else that you need throughout this process, well, you need somewhere secure to protect it. Secured encrypted vaults are perfect for this. We help select and configure your wallet. There's many options out there. Which ones are the best ones? We test all of them to filter out the good from the bad. You must be running a Bitcoin node. The node is the only way you remain fully private and sovereign in Bitcoin. Otherwise, you are leaking a ton of privacy details all over the place when you connect to somebody else's node. Things like transaction IDs, your wallet address, the amounts, all of that stuff you don't want to be doing, especially as the value of Bitcoin continues to appreciate. Test everything and practice. In the beginning, it may seem like a little workout, but the more you do it, the more normalized it becomes. And before you know it, you are doing this as seamlessly as having a cup of coffee. And of course, continue training, updating your tools, because Bitcoin is technology. There's always going to be new stuff coming out, things to fine-tune, things to improve. And since you are now the heads of security, well, you need to stay on top of all of these tools so that you don't potentially fall behind and inadvertently introduce counterparty risk to your setup. And so, just to sum it all up, Bitcoin self-custody is a serious process. It's not daunting. It's really very easy once it's explained to you properly. But you have to give it the respected commands. No shortcuts, no compromises, no counterparty risk. You must 100% accept that you have to unlearn all the lies and dependencies that we thought were just the way the world works when you want to come, full force into Bitcoin, because it was created to redefine the rules in a way that benefit 8 billion people and not a certain group of psychopaths that believe they have the right to dictate what we do with our time and energy. And that's it for now. Thank you, guys.
Okay, great stuff. Now, before I start asking the questions from the audience, I do have one question of my own, because I kind of know your story. Michael, I was on your podcast 2 times now. And Tony, I kind of know your story, but I never got to ask you this question. And so people here understand. On the human side, because you lived through it. Like for you, it wasn't hypothetical. You were in Lebanon when they closed the banks, and we watched from our country people with guns trying to get their own money from the bank. And you were in this position. And on the human level, I don't know if it is exactly the right question, but how do you feel then, and how do you rebuild from there? Like, because I hope a lot of people don't have to experience it, but like we can connect as humans. So if you could tell us a bit about this.
That's a very good question, and one that is very hard and painful to answer. I can tell you that this is the worst thing anyone can ever go through, and I genuinely don't wish anyone does, because you are living in a complete state of hopelessness. There are no answers to any of your questions, and there's absolutely no one to help you with anything. You go to bed one night, and you wake up the next morning with your life completely formatted, gone, nothing. The bank accounts, the money you thought you had, is gone. You literally have no access to anything anymore, and nobody will answer the phone or talk to you. So when this happens to one person, it's one thing, but when it happens to an entire country at the same time, that's a horror before. And the scenes that you saw on the news about people coming in with guns to bank accounts, that's just like a small piece of the puzzle. People resort to all sorts of craziness because now you're forced to go back to instinct behavior, and you don't know what you're capable of when placed in a situation like this, because unless you are, how would you know how to react? It's literally the survival of the fittest. So got people walking with guns into banks, that was like an everyday activity. Like you said, they weren't going in there to steal people's money, they were going in there to go take back their own funds because they had either sick family members or young kids to feed. Essential skills. But it was a failed attempt because there was no money in the banks. So, whatever little scraps they got, people killed each other over it. And if you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, well, if you didn't know how to self-defend yourself and fight, well, you can literally get killed. It's very simple. And so it's not a place you want to stay. And it took me a long time to sort of put the crumbs together, because back then it was like surviving on a barter basis. If you had a skill, you would trade it for somebody else's skill. So, like for example, if you were a barber, you would give free haircuts for somebody who had a little garden to give you tomatoes or cucumbers to eat. Like a lot of people were trading services that way because there's no money. Like, what are you going to do? So it took me about a year, to really start to find my way into something that somehow resembled money. And the whole Bitcoin story ties into this because I had to use my skill set somehow, but it's not like everybody needed it in a time of crisis. So I was, making like $1 or $2 a day sometimes, like I said, like pathetic little things just to survive. And so this is why my conviction in Bitcoin, thankfully we have it, is unshakable. Because I know what happened to Lebanon isn't isolated to one country. This is 100% coming everywhere. Because the mechanics of the fiat currencies are the same no matter where you live. So those, that don't opt out and just, I guess, wait and see, well, that wait and see is likely going to be extremely painful. And I don't wish that on anyone.
Yeah. I kind of knew that, but thank you for sharing again. And now let's start with the questions, and you decide who answers them. But one of the popular ones is always, what about quantum computing? So how do we respond to this?
Yeah, I'll answer that. Quantum computing, it's a good question, but it's not an immediate concern. I mean, we're very far away from any real threat in quantum computing. I would estimate maybe around, 10 years, maybe a little bit more. The good news is there are already a lot of very, very smart people working on a solution. So it's not like we're going to wait and see if we figure it out later. The work is already underway, and I'm very confident that way before we actually need it, there will be a solution to sort of upgrade whatever setups we have, whatever wallets we have to migrate to in order to protect ourselves against this threat. So all the news about these crazy chips from Google and what have you that came out, those are no threat to Bitcoin. Like I said, the encryption in Bitcoin is extremely high. and we're at least 10 years, maybe a little bit more from any real danger. I believe the protocol being worked on is the BIP 136, if I recall correctly.
Okay, great. One thought I had in a podcast that we had in the Bitcoin Club is that when the quantum computing actually happens, Bitcoiners are prepared, so anybody that holds any self-custody Bitcoin is kind of fucked. So every ETF will go down, the Bitcoin will stay with the custodian, but only the self-custody solutions will be protected, and all the all the people that gave their Bitcoin to the other people will just go down with quantum computing. Yeah.
I think I'd also add to that it's a legitimate question, a legitimate concern if it were to just completely go unaddressed. But I think Bitcoin's going to be the least of anyone's worries. If quantum computing is attacking Bitcoin, imagine what it's doing to your bank account or to any other mission critical infrastructure that we have. So I think, fortunately, as Tony said, we've got people working on this and thinking hard about it, way smarter than myself. And I'm just going to trust that the world is going to look a lot more chaotic besides Bitcoin if that reality were to come to fruition.
Absolutely. I mean, if quantum computing was a thing, Bitcoin is the last thing you should be worried about, because everything else is going to blow up first.
Yeah, agreed. Next question is, in that potential hypothetical, are Satoshi coins the most vulnerable to it? And are Satoshi coins going to be protected, or are they going to be somebody's jackpot?
That's a very good question. I mean, since nobody can access them and nobody can move them, I guess given enough time frame, maybe there might be some sort of computer that might crack it. But even if somebody did access it by then, I don't think it would matter. Once you have global adoption of something and it becomes the standard of money, yeah, it might cause a little bit of hype, a little bit of drama, the talk of the week sort of thing. But monetarily, I don't think it will impact much. Most people would probably not notice.
Yeah. Okay. Next question is, what if we reuse our addresses? How much problems are we going to have with this?
Which addresses?
Bitcoin addresses, sorry. If we reuse the same address.
Oh, reusing the same Bitcoin address?
Yes.
Well, it's more of a privacy, like don't do sort of thing. It's not the end of the world, but you want to get into the habit of not using the same address for recurring payments, simply because if somebody has access to that wallet, it's not that they can steal your funds, but they'll always know how much you have on that particular wallet. So by default, whenever you receive any monetary amount to any address, the right procedure is to switch it to a brand new one. And usually when things are set up properly, that's the default behavior anyhow. So it's not like you have a choice. You'd have to go out of your way to pick something that you've used before in order to trigger that. Okay.
Now more on the cybersecurity expertise. Is it mandatory to use a VPN when you have your setup? And should we use a provider like NordVPN, or what are your recommendations?
Using a good VPN is highly recommended. It's not a must, but it's highly recommended if you value your privacy and what have you. But when it comes to VPNs, you really have to be careful which ones you choose. There's a lot of VPNs that claim all sorts of things, but when you dig deep into them, you very quickly find out that a lot of them are not true. So for example, in our case, we only focus on open source VPNs, things that are provably no logs, and things of that sort, and we use them full time. You also have to be sure that they have a solid, robust backend infrastructure so that your internet experience is not affected. So you don't want to use a VPN and then every time you go somewhere it takes you half an hour to load the page. You're not going to use it, and so you forego the whole benefit of a VPN. So there's also some due diligence and homework required on that front in order to find the right solution. But if you're asking me if that's something we recommend, absolutely. We use them 24/7, both on computers and phones, no exception.
Okay.
I would double down on that, the open source, because one thing you don't know, if it's a proprietary tool, if it's something that they're advertising on a YouTube channel or something like that, it's probably closed source and proprietary. You want to stay away from, because you don't know what intelligence agencies might be on the back end, or it really, like, you might be just thinking that you're doing all these privacy related things completely privately, and none of it is. It's being logged, documented, sent off to a third party, and potentially even a really bad third party. But that's just I don't trust anyone anymore. So that's my feeling.
Cool. Yeah, on that front, I would like to disagree with you guys that Bitcoin is for everybody, but there's a little nuance. It's for everybody, but not on the first layer in self-custody. Unfortunately, the design is such that it can't accommodate 5 billion people. And I do believe that VPN will be more and more valuable when we get to the second and third layers and those solutions, because you need to protect it on that front. But would you agree with this?
Well, I mean, not owning Bitcoin is the worst situation you can be in. If it's the choice between owning Bitcoin and not having any, but owning it and leaving it on an exchange, at least initially, obviously owning some is better. However, if you decide to understand Bitcoin and study it, it should become very quickly apparent, for you that this is the scarcest asset, we have ever seen. And so you don't want to be like flippant with it. So if you can go and get it right the first time by learning these skills, there's no need to take unnecessary risk or sort of like, quote unquote, waste time leaving it in with a third-party custodian and potentially assuming these risks, because that risk can come at any moment in time. You don't know what's going to happen. Like, you can buy the Bitcoin today and say, okay, well, I'm at Coinbase, they're a good company, everything is cool. And then you go to bed and you wake up tomorrow and there's a headline that somebody hacked Coinbase and drained their funds. Then even though you've only been there for like 12 hours, you're still finished. You've lost your funds. So that's what I mean. People know, or at least more people are becoming aware of how valuable Bitcoin is. And I'm not talking about its value in fiat terms. That is the most worthless metric. I'm talking about its value as money, as the world's scarcest asset. And as more people get to know this, it's going to attract a lot more attention to it. And of course, the honeypots, everybody knows who they are. And so I would never sleep for half a second if I had money on a place like Coinbase, knowing that it's holding almost all the ETFs. And once that valuation goes up, it's just a ticking time bomb. We already saw it 2 days ago. That was like the appetizer when they hacked Coinbase for 20 million. So just to give you a preview of what that infrastructure looks like. You cannot trust anyone other than yourself.
Yeah.
Ivan, you're right that base layer Bitcoin isn't probably going to scale to 8 billion people. I think we're, the L2s, the L3s are going to become important. And I wouldn't be surprised, and I don't know if Tony agrees with this or not, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people 10 years from now don't have the opportunity for self-sovereignty that we have, but at least they're operating with better money and some level of privacy perhaps, or, but we also try to speak to people where they are today. At this moment, when we're helping onboard clients, we're orange pilling friends and family, they have an opportunity for base layer Bitcoin, sufficiently sized UTXOs to be able to operate. We're going to be the kings and queens of the future because we can operate on the base layer in a way that other people can't. But getting not just self-custody right, but also we consult on other things too, things like UTXO management, right? Like making sure that you're right sizing for both privacy and transaction efficiency in the future. So, but I agree with you. It's Bitcoin, base layer Bitcoin is not for everybody because it simply can't be.
Yeah, I missed the part where you said the base layer, Ivan. Sorry about that. So,
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. The base layer, I think this year, 2025, it'll be out of reach for pretty much everybody who hasn't gotten into it. Simply because the wrong people understand Bitcoin now the way we do. And by the wrong people, I mean governments and institutions. There isn't much Bitcoin left on the global market. There's about, I think, 1.3 million Bitcoin, if you were to. And what's that? You know, really, for like a U.S. government, for example, that's like the price of a chocolate bar. You know, in like 30 seconds, they can siphon up the entire supply. And when that happens, that's when you wake up to the headlines that Bitcoin is some crazy number, and then people are wondering what the hell happened. Well, what happens is that it's gone. There's no more. And so the urgency to get off zero has never been higher, simply because the window of time has never been smaller. So whoever doesn't have any Bitcoin, any amount is better than having nothing. So, but you're right, at some point, 8 billion people will never be able to purchase that base layer, the one that you can go now at Coinbase and buy it and withdraw it. Those days will be gone.
Yeah. Okay, a little bit more advanced question is, when we have a multi-sig, we need to also back up the public keys. Are there any risks with leaking my public keys apart from disclosing my addresses?
Are you talking about a multi-sig where you're doing it yourself, or like a collaborative multi-sig?
Yourself, right? Or, yes, about yourself.
Well, if you're doing it yourself, where would you post it? For example, there's more than just the public keys that you like. There's a lot of files that you have to safeguard on a multi-sig in order for you to be able to reconstruct it. Excuse me, successfully later on. I mean, there's config files, there's descriptor files. You know, all of these important details you have to be able to secure and be able to put together again if you wanted to reconstruct it. So you don't want to post any of this stuff anywhere. This remains 100% from your eyes only. I don't know if that answers your question.
It kind of answers the question, but that would necessitate you having your own nodes. Am I understanding
it?
Well,
you don't have to have your own node. I mean, of course, it's highly recommended and preferable if you're running your own node, but you can have a multi-sig and still connect to a public node. Now, if you post the XPub of your multi-sig somewhere, well, yeah, then you give away the whole activity of all the wallets in that multi-sig.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Is the question answered?
I was curious if there are any additional risks besides like leaking my addresses if I post the XPub somewhere.
What additional risks?
I don't know if somehow I.
The question is, if we do this not best practice, are there any additional risks?
Well, look, if you're doing a multi-sig by yourself at home and you post the XPub somewhere, well, then you've given away the history of all the wallet addresses. But is it like an imminent danger to you? No, because nobody knows who you are. It's not like you've KYC'd yourself somewhere where there's an identity attached to that XPub. It's just an XPub with a log file of everything that's happening on it.
Tony, if your Bitcoin's KYC'd though, if you went through like a traditional exchange,
if your Bitcoin is KYC'd, yes, you have a potentially big problem, because now there's a name and an address and a phone number and all that other fun stuff attached to that XPub. That you absolutely don't want to happen.
Yeah. So to answer the question, I think privacy is the big risk.
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound like there are necessarily others, but it's a sufficiently big risk that I think people should be aware of it and very cautious.
Well, the privacy risk can lead to a personal risk, right? Like depending on the name and the amount and what have you. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah. Okay. Next one is, how secure is the 25th word if somebody finds my 24 words?
Extremely secure. You cannot. You're never gonna find it, and it's never stored on any air-gapped device. You can dissect the device, tear it apart, put it under a microscope. If you haven't told anyone that you're using a passphrase, it's impossible to figure out. Okay, so yeah.
If we
don't take seed first security lightly, though. I mean,
don't pick like a one-letter passphrase like the letter A, B, C. Like, okay, yeah, that's not ideal. But any reasonably good 25th word, forget it.
Yeah. Okay, great. If we bought Bitcoin from an exchange, how we can disconnect the BTC from KYC of the exchange?
That's the $1 million question, and everybody wants to know. Well, look, there's two ways you can do this. The clean way is that you sell back the KYC to exactly where you bought it from, and then you use these funds to buy no KYC Bitcoin. Otherwise, there's no, like, you cannot remove the record of the KYC any other way. The other alternative, if you're not in a position to do this, is to participate in forward privacy giving services like coin joins, for example. There's also certain layer 2s that will sort of like erase, give you like break the heuristics between your KYC and your coins, so that like the exchange will know that you bought X amount of coins, but then what happened to them later, nobody knows. So if you say you lost them, it's going to be extremely difficult for them to see if you're lying or not. So there are tools, privacy tools that can give you that forward privacy. But if you wanted to break it, like eliminate the trace completely, there's only one way, and that's selling it back so that there's a record of a purchase, but then a sale. So effectively, you're back to zero.
Okay. Final two questions. The first one is, Michael, you told your journey, but could you give a little bit of a reference from the bad way of having Bitcoin to the proper way? How much did it take you to develop those skills?
Yeah, the skills actually came rather quickly. Like Tony said, it really isn't that hard. It's just a new skill set that you have to learn. And once you've gone through the process of like setting up in self-custody properly, and then practicing, like I do a wallet recovery, every few months. I'll pay for a new hardware wallet and just make sure, like I'm sort of paranoid, so I'll just make sure everything's still working as it should. And I try to stay ahead of that before things break. I will say it's a big 0 to 1 leap, though, going from something like certainly keeping coins on an exchange, but even collaborative custody, because when you're in collaborative custody, what you lack are any skills related to custodying your Bitcoin. I mean, it's like, I'm trying to think of the like a good analogy, but like we use apps in our daily life to make our lives easier, and without that app, without that crutch, you could never do whatever that app is doing for you. And it's the same thing with collaborative custody. I didn't have any of those skills, but when I started working with the Bitcoin way, it became obvious. I knew why I needed to leave, because I was using a proprietary app, a really bad hardware wallet. I would get my hardware wallet in the computer. So I was doing all the things that really weren't helping me acquire the skills I needed to be able to operate sovereignly, with Bitcoin. So I would say within, a couple of weeks of migrating into full self-custody, it's very intuitive. And now I send test transactions. I told you I do wallet recoveries, buy no KYC Bitcoin. Like all of these things just become very intuitive once you've done them a couple of times. So yeah, I would encourage, seriously, I mean, we've got clients who are in their 80s who are running their own node in full self-custody. I'd be very surprised if there's anyone listening to this right now who doesn't have the competency to figure it out pretty quickly.
Cool. One more question came in, is running my own node on a PC with Windows OS. Does it make sense to use it, or should we use a dedicated device only for the node?
Dedicated device for the node. Keep it separate and isolated, running on your network. Always more reliable that way.
Tony, we have hardware we recommend. Tony, would you recommend? I don't know if there's a question I've ever heard you answer. If someone just bought like an older laptop or something, wiped it clean, and then used that exclusively as a dedicated node.
Technically, it could be. Technically, of course, it can be done, but you're missing out on a whole bunch of other features and benefits by running it on its own dedicated platform. For example, something like a Start 9, you'll have a much more complete experience, reliability, performance-wise, and what have you, versus running it on a laptop, which you have to maintain. Make sure it doesn't turn off. Make sure you don't inadvertently do something to break something or catch something. Like you don't want to take short. This is what I mean. Like you don't want to take shortcuts with this stuff. The cost of these things has gone down considerably. The price of a good node today is about $500 or $600, so it's not an exorbitant amount, and it's not a device that you need to interact with on a regular basis. Like once it's set up, it literally just sits there, connected via Ethernet to your router, and that's it. Your wallets are configured to transact through it no matter where you are located. So whether you're home, abroad, as long as you're online, you're sending, receiving privately via your own device. So being the own bank, no compromises, no shortcuts. Do it right, set it up. This is your money, your generational wealth.
Okay. Now, last question, and the hardest for last is, how do I keep my Solana secure?
You go ask the XRP army.
Okay. Okay. Well, this was a great conversation, guys. Thank you very much for the time, and keep up the good work. So, if anybody wants to reach out, how can they get in contact with you?
Michael, go ahead.
Yeah. Just go to the bitcoinway.com. You can schedule a free 30-minute consult with our team. We'll walk you through our process, answer like a lot of these questions. These are things our team is answering every day. So we'll share all that with you. I'm here in good faith. Like I was a client. I would never have joined this team if I didn't have the experience that I had, and I'm so much more comfortable with using Bitcoin properly. I've got 3 kids, I've got a wife. Like, how am I going to pass this down to them and ensure that I'm protecting my financial future, not just for myself, but for my family? I would really encourage everyone to go to the bitcoinway.com and schedule some time and at least take that step to learn more. It's an investment of time and an investment of capital, as Tony said, but it's worth every sat that you're going to spend. And by the way, we do only accept your sats. We do not accept dirty fiat. So keep that in mind as you look at working with us. But we can help you figure out how to make payment and all that stuff. We'll walk you through anything.
Absolutely. Bitcoin self-custody is the best investment in yourself you can ever make, hands down.
Okay. Thank you very much again, guys, and wish you a nice day.
Thanks for having us, man. It was great being here.
Good seeing you, man. Take care. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao.